The night my world burned, I stood on Emily's porch with a suitcase in one hand and ashes in the other. Smoke clung to my coat, stubborn as regret, and the air was sharp with the chill of a South Carolina November. Her house loomed before me, a catalog-perfect Charleston dream, stone facade, tall black door, potted plants arranged just so. Under the golden glow of the porch light, it looked like a painting, untouchable, flawless. I was none of those things. My hand shook as I knocked, the sound swallowed by the hum of crickets and the distant wail of a siren. I hadn't called ahead. I hadn't needed to. She was my daughter, my only child, the one I'd raised alone through sweat and sleepless nights. Surely, she'd open the door. When she did, Emily stood there in a white cardigan over a silk blouse, her hair a polished cascade of chestnut waves. Not a strand out of place. She didn't ask why I was there, didn't glance at the suitcase or the soot smudging my sleeves. Her eyes, those same hazel eyes I'd kissed goodnight for years, skimmed over me like I was a stain on her beige couch. "You can't stay here, Mom," she said, voice soft but unyielding. "You ruin the aesthetic." The door closed with a quiet click, final as a judge's gavel. I stood there, the weight of her words sinking into my bones, heavier than the fire that had taken everything else. I don't remember walking away, only the blur of streetlights and the ache in my chest. I ended up at the Oakview Inn off I-26, $28 a night, a place that smelled of mildew and broken promises. The room had a bed, a cracked mirror, and a lamp that flickered like it was deciding whether to give up. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my phone in my lap, and realized I had no one to call. No husband, no siblings, no friends close enough to burden with this. I'd poured my life into Emily, and now I was an inconvenience, a smudge on her perfect canvas. Oakwood Terrace, where I'd raised her, was a world away from her Charleston mansion. Our old neighborhood was all clapboard houses and chain-link fences, the kind of place where kids played in the street until the streetlights buzzed on, and neighbors shouted gossip over backyard fences. The air there carried the tang of barbecue smoke and jasmine, and the summer heat pressed against your skin like a living thing. I'd worked doubles at the diner, my feet swollen in cheap sneakers, then stayed up late sewing for a tailor shop to keep the lights on. Emily's father, Daniel, left when she was 10, taking nothing but his clothes and leaving me with a mortgage, a daughter, and a Buick that wouldn't start in the rain. I never remarried. Never had the time. Never trusted another man to stay. Emily had been my everything, straight A's, a scholarship to college, a nutritionist now married to a plastic surgeon. I watched her climb into a life of new cars, new houses, new friends, each step pulling her further from me. I was proud, but pride doesn't keep you warm. I never imagined she'd lock me out when I had nothing left. That night at the motel, I cried quietly, muffling the sound so no one in the next room would hear. I wasn't a crier, not when I lost my job at the diner, not when I buried my sister alone. But this was different. It was the moment I realized I'd become disposable. Morning came, gray and heavy, the sky spitting rain that matched my mood. I couldn't stay in that room, staring at the peeling wallpaper. My feet led me back to Oakwood Terrace, though I hadn't planned it. The streets were the same, cracked and overgrown, the houses sagging under the weight of years. I walked past our old two-bedroom, its paint chipped, the fence leaning like it was tired. The backyard was a tangle of dandelions, just like when Emily used to blow their seeds and wish for things I couldn't give her. That's when I saw Velma, sitting on her porch across the street, shelling peas into a metal bowl. Her hair was grayer now, but her laugh hadn't changed, loud enough to scatter the birds. "Maggie Walker," she called, squinting at me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't tell her everything, just that I was at the Oakview, needed air, was figuring things out. Velma's eyes were sharp, cutting through my half-truths. "You're not figuring things out, sugar," she said, tossing a peapod into the pile. "You're trying not to fall apart." We sat for hours, the porch creaking under us, talking about old times, our daughters, the years that had slipped away like wild horses. Velma had always been my anchor, the one who'd bring me coffee when I was up all night with a sick Emily, the one who'd pray over me when I didn't have the strength to pray for myself. She leaned forward, her voice low. You still got fight in you, Maggie. You just forgot how to throw a punch. That night, back at the motel, her words burned in me. I didn't sleep. I lay there, the vending machine humming outside, and thought about every sacrifice, every late night, every time I'd put Emily first. I'd given her everything, and she'd given me a closed door. At 4 a.m., I opened the little black notebook I kept in my purse, the one where I'd tracked every penny I'd saved, stocks, old CDs, sewing money. I added it up. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Not for revenge. For something better. 2 weeks later, I found the house. Big white columns, wraparound porch, views of the marsh, a Southern belle's dream. Emily had circled a picture like it in a magazine when she was 12, saying, "One day, I'm gonna live there." I bought it in cash. Then I took a picture, fresh paint, manicured lawn, a red for sale sign out front, and texted it to her. No caption, just the image. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom? Her voice was tight. Why did you send me that house? Because I bought it, I said, calm as I'd ever been. It's yours. Or it could be. But I'm thinking of selling it. Her voice trembled. Why would you do that? Because, sweetheart, I said, it fits your aesthetic. I hung up before she could answer, and for the first time in years, I smiled. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't know, was that this wasn't just about a house. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would break us open and, maybe, put us back together. First, though, there were secrets to unearth, and Emily wasn't the only one who'd been hiding things. Emily didn't call again that night. I half expected her to, maybe to scream, maybe to cry, maybe to call me dramatic, but silence settled in like fog over a low-country marsh, thick and cold, full of things left unsaid. I stayed another night at the Oakview Inn, the mattress harder than I remembered, the vending machines hum outside my door louder, like it was mocking my sleeplessness. I stared at the water-stained ceiling, letting the stillness stretch. For once, I wasn't rushing to fix anything. For once, I was the one in control. The next morning, I drove to the house, the one I'd bought. It sat proud on a hill, its white columns gleaming in the sunlight, the wraparound porch begging for lazy Sunday coffees and whispered gossip. I walked through it, room by room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. They creaked, like they were whispering stories of the families who'd lived here before. The air smelled of lemon polish and something deeper, older, like history waiting to be rewritten. In the dining room, a crystal chandelier caught the morning light, fracturing it into tiny rainbows across the walls. I imagined Emily at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, charming her polished friends. I wondered if she'd ever see this place as more than a photo on her phone. I was in the sunroom, sipping cold coffee from a paper cup, when I heard tires crunch on the gravel driveway. I didn't move, just waited. After a minute, the front door opened. She'd used the key I'd sent 2 days ago, wrapped in a velvet pouch. Mama? Her voice was soft, unsure, not the clipped tone from her porch. I stayed silent. Her heels clicked across the floor, sharp as gunshots, until she found me. She looked like she hadn't slept, eyes puffy, hair frizzed at the edges, her usual polish fraying. You really bought this? She asked, her gaze darting around the room like it might vanish. I nodded, leaning back in the wicker chair. Why? She pressed, her voice cracking. Because you said I ruined your aesthetic, I said. I figured I'd find one that suited you better. Her face crumpled, just for a moment, then the wall went back up. She straightened her shoulders, chin lifting. This isn't funny, Mom. I'm not laughing. You sent me a picture of a house you knew I'd love and then put a for sale sign on it. Her voice rose, trembling. I thought you liked signs. She blinked, caught off guard. Is this revenge? No, I said, my voice low. It's a mirror. We sat in silence, the kind that presses against your chest. The sunroom smelled of jasmine from the garden outside, and the marsh beyond shimmered under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Finally, she whispered, "You don't understand how things are now. My world, it's curated, structured. Everything has a place, a look, a standard. And you," she swallowed. "You don't fit." I stared at her, my daughter, the girl I'd taught to tie her shoes, to braid her hair, to stand tall. "I didn't raise you to blend in," I said. "I raised you to stand tall." She looked away, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan. "Is that why you've been rewriting things?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. Her head snapped back toward me. "What are you talking about? You told people your father left and never looked back. But that's not the truth, is it?" Her mouth parted, but no words came. I stood, walked to a drawer I'd filled the day before with papers from a dusty box I'd salvaged from my old house. I pulled out an envelope, worn and bent at the corners, and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the letter inside. It was from Daniel, dated 8 years after he left. He'd tried to come back, begged for forgiveness, said he'd found God, found purpose, found the strength to be a better man. He'd visited twice, but wasn't allowed through the door. Her lips moved as she read, her face paling. Then her knees buckled, and she sank onto the couch. I told him to leave," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "He called." I answered. "He said he wanted to see us." I told him we didn't need him. I was 16. I thought I was protecting you." I sat beside her, my heart pounding. "I was angry," she continued, her voice breaking. "You worked so hard. He left you with everything. I wanted to punish him." Tears filled her eyes. "And so you erased him?" She nodded, barely. "I never told you. I didn't think you'd forgive me." I reached for her hand. She flinched at first, then let me hold it. "There's more than one way to ruin a home, Emily," I said quietly. "Sometimes it's not fire. Sometimes it's silence." We sat there, the weight of years pressing down. The marsh outside hummed with life, frogs croaking, birds calling, but inside, it was just us, 2 women staring at the wreckage of our choices. "I don't deserve this house," she said finally, her voice small. "That's not for me to decide," I replied. Her eyes found mine, searching. "What if I wanted to earn it?" I didn't answer, just looked out at the garden, overgrown with wildflowers, life pushing through the cracks. "Then we'd have to start again," I said. "And it won't be easy." "I don't want easy," she said, her voice breaking. "I want you back." A part of me softened, but another part, the part that remembered her cold porch light, her perfect cardigan, held firm. "Then don't say it," I whispered. "Show it." She nodded, and just like that, the first brick of the wall between us cracked. But as I'd soon learn, the house wasn't the only thing full of secrets. There was one more envelope in that box, tucked at the bottom, and it would change everything. The envelope weighted, yellowed, and sealed with brittle tape, buried at the bottom of the box like a secret too heavy to carry. I found it the day after Emily left the house, her eyes red from tears and promises to try. Funny how a single piece of paper can lie dormant for decades, patient, unmoving, until the exact moment it's meant to unravel you. I was in the kitchen, the morning sun slicing through the windows, painting the new house in shades of gold. Outside, the marsh glittered, and the for sale sign leaned slightly, tugged by the wind. I hadn't taken it down yet. Maybe I wanted it to stay, a quiet challenge to the world, or to her. I stared at the envelope, my coffee growing cold. The house was silent, save for the soft creak of the floorboards settling, as if they, too, were holding their breath. When I finally opened it, the handwriting stopped my heart. It was Daniel's, sharp, slanted, hurried, like he was always halfway out the door, even on paper. I hadn't seen his script in over 30 years, but I'd know it anywhere. I could hear his voice in every scratch of the pen. The letter was dated 4 years ago. 4. Not decades, not ancient history, but recent, close enough to touch. Maggie, it began, if this finds you, it means I finally found the nerve to try again. My hands trembled as I read. He wrote of regret, of the man he'd been, a coward, he called himself, consumed by fear and failure. He'd tried to come back twice, but Emily had turned him away, telling him we were better off, that he'd only bring pain. I stopped reading, my eyes blurring. I could still see her at 16, sharp-tongued and fierce, guarding me like a lioness, but wounding me in ways she couldn't see. She'd buried this truth, and I'd lived in its shadow, believing he'd never looked back. I pressed the letter to my chest, rocking slightly in the chair. The pain wasn't betrayal, not exactly, it was grief, given a second life. When I finished, I learned more. Daniel had remarried once, briefly, no children. His wife died of cancer, and he'd moved to Tennessee, living simply, working at a used bookstore, writing letters he never sent. The last line undid me. If I don't get to see you again in this life, know that I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping for one more chance. I had to find him. I didn't know why, not for closure, not for love, but for something I couldn't name. Maybe I needed to look him in the eye and decide if there was anything left of us. That afternoon, I told Velma. She was leaning over her porch railing, a cigarette dangling from her fingers, her eyes narrowing as I spoke. "You've got that old fire in you again, Maggie," she said. "You going somewhere?" "Tennessee," I said, folding laundry on my own porch, the new house's shadow stretching across the lawn. "Maybe for a few days. Maybe longer." She raised an eyebrow. "That where the bones are buried?" I smiled, barely. "No, but maybe it's where I left part of myself." 3 days later, I drove west, alone. I hadn't been on a road trip in decades. The windows were down, the radio low, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. I passed towns with names like Enery and Whitmire, diners serving coffee so strong it could wake the dead. By the time I reached the address from the letter, a one-story house with faded blue shutters, it was dusk. A "for rent" sign stood out front, and my stomach dropped. I knocked anyway. A thin woman in her 40s answered, her expression puzzled when I asked for Daniel Walker. "He passed away last spring," she said softly. "I'm the landlord now." The ground seemed to vanish beneath me. "Pancreatic cancer," she continued. It was fast. Didn't make it 3 months after diagnosis. I couldn't breathe. I didn't cry, just stood there, numb, the marsh air from home still lingering in my memory, now clashing with this sterile truth. Then she said, "Are you Maggie?" I blinked, nodding. Her smile was warm, kind. "He talked about you all the time. Said you were the one that got away. He left something for you." She led me inside. The house smelled of old books and lemon oil. On a shelf near the window was a small wooden box, carved with tiny birds. Inside were photos, me and Emily, years ago, laughing in our Oakwood Terrace backyard, a pressed flower from our wedding, and another letter. This one was shorter. "You were my lighthouse, even when I drifted. I hope you found happiness. I hope you knew, deep down, I always loved you. If there's still a chance, wherever I am, I'll be waiting." I don't remember the drive back, only that the sun was rising when I pulled into the driveway of the new house. Emily's car was there. She sat on the porch steps, knees to her chest, makeup streaked down her face. When I got out, she stood but didn't speak. I walked up slowly, Daniel's letter in my coat pocket. "I know," she said before I could open my mouth. "I know about the letter." "I know you know." "Why, Emily?" My voice was steady, but it carried 30 years of weight. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "I thought he didn't T4. I thought he didn't deserve you. I was wrong. I know that now." I searched her face, really looked, and saw the little girl who'd curl up beside me during storms, believing I could fix anything. "I forgave him," I said. She choked out a sob. "Can you forgive me?" I didn't answer, not yet. Forgiveness isn't a lightning bolt, it's a slow rain. I needed her to earn it, to carry it like I'd carried her. The truth was out, but the story wasn't over. Redemption isn't given, it's built. And I had an idea of how we could start. It started with paint. Not marble countertops or designer wallpaper, just paint, white, soft yellow, lavender in the bedrooms. Colors that welcomed, that breathed. Emily rolled the first coat on the living room wall herself, hair tied up in a messy knot, sleeves pushed back, her designer nails chipped by day's end. She didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't care. That was the first sign she was trying, really trying, not just with words but with sweat and smudged mascara. The house, once a symbol of her unattainable perfection, began to shift, its sharp edges softening under our hands. It wasn't a mansion anymore, it was becoming something alive. I watched her from the doorway, a paint roller in my hand, the air thick with the sharp tang of latex and marsh salt drifting through the open windows. Outside, the low-country sun burned gold, glinting off the water, while cicadas sang their endless hymn. The porch swing creaked in the breeze, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. This was Charleston in late fall, humid, heavy, but alive in a way that made you feel like you could start over, no matter how many times you'd fallen apart. Velma showed up that afternoon, her old pickup rattling into the driveway, a cooler of sweet tea and a toolbox in the bed. "Y'all turning this place into a museum or what?" she teased, stepping onto the porch with a grin that hadn't aged a day. She took one look at Emily, paint splattered on her cheek, and laughed. "Well, look at Miss Charleston getting her hands dirty." Emily flushed but smiled, a real smile, not the polished one she used for her surgeon husband's dinner parties. We worked side by side, me, Emily, Velma, and a few old friends from Oakwood Terrace who'd heard I was back and came without being asked. There was Loretta, who'd lived across from our old house and still wore her wide-brimmed hats like a queen, and June, who'd babysat Emily when I worked late, her hands now gnarled but steady. They didn't come for Emily's name or her money. They came for me, for the years we'd shared in that neighborhood of cracked sidewalks and dandelion wishes. They came because they knew what it was to lose and keep going. Emily didn't talk much, but her silence wasn't cold anymore. It was focused, like she was pouring herself into the walls, trying to prove something to me, to herself. When she did speak, it was to ask questions, small ones at first, like where to hang a picture frame or if the kitchen should be blue. But then, one evening, as we sanded baseboards in the dining room, she looked up, her eyes catching the chandelier's fractured light. "Mama," she said, voice low, "did you ever hate me?" The question hit like a stone. I set down my sandpaper, dust clinging to my fingers. "Hate you?" I said. "No. Never." I was angry, hurt, but hate. That's not what mothers do. She nodded, biting her lip, her hands still moving over the wood. "I hated myself," she whispered. "For what I did. For what I said on the porch. I didn't know how to let you in. I wanted to reach for her, but I didn't. Not yet." "You're here now," I said. "That's a start." She nodded again, and we kept sanding, the rhythm of our work louder than words. That night, she stayed late, long after Velma and the others left. We sat on the porch, sharing a plate of June's peach cobbler, the air cool and scented with gardenias. "I want to fix what I broke," Emily said, her voice steady but soft. "Not just between us. I want to be someone who makes space for women like you. Women like us." I didn't say much, just kept eating, but something in me softened, a knot in my chest loosening. "Then let's do it," I said finally. "But it's not about me giving you something. It's about you building it." She looked at me, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in years, hope. "What do we call it?" she asked. I thought of the roses climbing the trellis out back, wild and stubborn, blooming despite neglect. "Rose Harbor," I said. "A place for women who've been cast aside, abandoned, left with nowhere to go. Women like me." She nodded, and I saw it, the first spark of purpose in her, not borrowed from her husband's world or her curated life, but hers. We named it that night, Rose Harbor, a transitional home for older women, a sanctuary for the forgotten. It was Emily's idea to make it official, to turn the house into a nonprofit, but I could feel it was more than that. It was her way of saying she saw me, not as a smudge on her aesthetic, but as a woman who'd fought and deserved to be fought for. The next day, we tore down the for sale sign. It hit the ground with a thud, and Emily laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, like when she was a girl chasing fireflies in Oakwood Terrace. We painted over the dining room sterile gray with a warm ivory, hung curtains Loretta sewed from old fabric scraps, and swapped the Art Deco chandelier for soft Edison bulbs that glowed like firelight. Delma picked the kitchen tile, a mismatched mosaic she swore was funky but holy. Emily didn't argue, just smiled and laid the grout herself. 3 months later, Rose Harbor opened its doors. We held a gathering on the front lawn, nothing fancy, just plastic chairs, lemonade, and a high school band playing off-key jazz. I wore the navy dress I'd worn to Emily's graduation, still snug but fitting. Emily stood on the porch, her voice shaking as she spoke to the crowd. "My mother built me a life when she had nothing," she said. I turned my back on her when all she asked for was a place to sleep. I was cruel, selfish, and she didn't repay me with anger. She gave me a gift I didn't deserve. Today, I'm asking for something better than forgiveness. I'm asking for a second chance. The crowd was silent, then a few clapped, then more, until the air vibrated with it. I cried quietly in my chair, dabbing my eyes with a napkin that smelled of barbecue sauce. Later, as the stars blinked into the sky, Emily brought me iced tea and sat beside me on the porch steps, her head on my shoulder like when she was little. "You were right," she whispered. "A house doesn't make a home." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the deed, folded, worn, signed to her name months ago. "I already gave this to you," I said. "But I want you to understand what it means. You get the house, but Rose Harbor stays. The women stay. The mission stays." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I won't let you down again." I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll be fine." A week later, a letter arrived, no return address. Inside was a photo, me, Daniel, Emily at 3, smiling like no one else existed. On the back, in his slanted script, "You made it home." I knew. I don't know who sent it, maybe a bookstore coworker, maybe God, maybe the wind carrying things where they belong. All I know is the house isn't quiet anymore. There's laughter in the halls, stories told in rocking chairs, women dancing in the kitchen at midnight. There are scars, yes, but also healing. Also grace. It had been 6 days since Emily stood on the porch of Rose Harbor and said the words I'd waited decades to hear, "I want you back." 6 days since her voice cracked under the weight of regret, her eyes pleading for a bridge across the chasm we'd built. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't ready to cross it fully, not yet. Healing isn't just about gluing broken pieces together, sometimes it's about sitting with the shards, understanding why they broke. For me, that meant going back to the beginning, to the place where my story started, long before the fire, the porch, or the house with its white columns. I hadn't been to Oakwood Terrace in nearly a decade, but on that 7th morning, I found myself driving its cracked streets, past overgrown lots and rusted mailboxes half swallowed by weeds. The neighborhood was a tapestry of memory, clapboard houses sagging under time, porches where women once braided each other's hair, the air heavy with the scent of collards simmering and the faint sweetness of jasmine. This was where I'd raised Emily, where I'd learned to be a mother alone, where I'd buried dreams to keep her fed. Beneath its peeling paint and forgotten fences were answers I didn't know I still needed. Our old house stood, barely. The paint had flaked to gray, the chain-link fence leaned like it was tired of standing, but the oak tree in the front yard, the one Emily climbed every summer, was taller, stronger, blooming with white blossoms that fell like soft promises. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and just stood there, letting the memories flood in, Emily's laughter as she chased fireflies, the creak of the screen door when I came home from the diner, the weight of Daniel's absence like a shadow I could never outrun. That's when I saw her, Mrs. Loretta Mason, elegant as ever, sitting on her porch across the street in a wide-brimmed hat, a mug of tea steaming in her hands. She was in her 80s now, but time hadn't dulled her grace. Maggie Walker, she called, her voice warm as the sun. Is that you? I laughed through the lump in my throat and crossed the street. We talked for hours, the porch creaking under us, about the old days, how the neighborhood had changed, how we'd changed. She told me about her grandson, now a teacher in Atlanta, and I told her about Rose Harbor, about Emily's redemption, though I kept the rawest parts close. Then, out of nowhere, she said something that froze me. I always wondered what really happened between you and Daniel. Her eyes were steady, searching. I set my tea down. What do you mean? She sipped slowly, deliberate. I saw him, a few years after he left. He came by, asking if I knew where you'd moved. Said he was trying to find his girls. My heart pounded. You never told me. She looked down, guilty. I didn't want to stir up pain. But now, seeing you, maybe that was wrong. Maybe you needed to know he tried. It was the second time someone had told me Daniel came back, and it clicked. Emily hadn't just closed the door on him, she'd buried the truth, all of it, out of pain, fear, or love twisted into something sharp. I'd lived in a false story for decades, believing I'd been forgotten. I thanked Loretta, my voice tight, and drove back to the house, not the old one, but Rose Harbor, with its porch swing and columns, the one that held my future as much as my past. The air felt heavier when I stepped inside, as if the walls had absorbed the weight of what I'd learned. I knew what I had to do. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a space tucked behind a door in the upstairs hallway, unfinished and dusty, smelling of cedar and thyme. That's where I'd stashed the box, the one that survived the fire because it was in my car's trunk, untouched by flames. I hadn't opened it since moving in, too raw from the loss of my old rental, from Emily's rejection. Now, it sat waiting, a relic of my life before. Inside were photos, receipts, letters, and a folded piece of notebook paper, torn at the edges, in Emily's handwriting. My breath caught. Mom, it began, if you're reading this, I guess I couldn't say it to your face. You loved me so hard I didn't know how to love you back. Every success I had felt like a debt I owed you. Every mistake you made felt like a wound I couldn't stop picking at. I didn't understand what you gave up for me until it was too late. My knees gave way. I sat on the attic floor, the box beside me, and wept, not for the house, not for Daniel, but for the girl I'd raised, who'd carried as much pain as I had, only hers had built walls while mine had built distance. That night, I didn't call her. Instead, I took down the for sale sign, its red letters faded from the sun. The next morning, I went to a lawyer and signed the deed to Emily's name, but not just as a house, as a responsibility. One condition, it would be a non-profit residence for women over 50, displaced, rejected, or left with nowhere to go. I sent the papers to her with a note, your aesthetic doesn't define your worth, but maybe now it can rebuild someone else's. The following day, Emily knocked on the door. No makeup, no pretense, just tears and a folder in her hand. She handed me the signed papers. I want to help them, she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. I want to start with you. And just like that, the door that had slammed shut opened again, not just for us, but for so many more. The marsh outside hummed, the roses bloomed wild, and I felt it, the first roots of something new, something that could hold us both. There's a moment just before dawn when the Charleston sky turns a deep velvet blue, and everything feels suspended, not quite night, not quite morning, just a stillness where the world holds its breath. I stood on Rose Harbor's porch that morning, coffee in hand, watching fog roll in from the marsh. The air smelled of salt and earth, and the house behind me was quiet, peaceful for now. Inside, two women slept in rooms we'd prepared the day before. Sandra, kicked out of her son's home after a broken hip made her too much work, and Denise, a former teacher who'd lived in her car for a year after her husband drained their retirement and vanished. They weren't statistics to me, they were me, their bags heavy with the same rejection I'd carried. They were Rose Harbor's first. Emily had taken the signed papers and run with them. She'd hired a nonprofit consultant, met with city leaders, reached out to social workers. She even set up a small fund to cover initial expenses, every decision brought to me with a question: "Does this feel right, Mama?" I never thought I'd hear her call me that again, not with the softness she used now. In between meetings, she cleaned rooms, painted furniture, drove the old church van across town to pick up donations. Each day, she asked me questions, not the hollow kind meant for small talk, but real ones, raw ones. What did you dream about before you had me? Did you ever want to run away? Did I make you happy? That last one stole my breath. We were in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes, the scent of lemon soap mixing with the marsh's briny tang. I looked her in the eye, suds dripping from my hands. "You were the best and hardest thing that ever happened to me," I said. She didn't flinch, just nodded, like she was finally ready to carry the weight of that truth. That's when I knew she was changing, and maybe I was, too. But the past wasn't done with us. 3 weeks after Rose Harbor opened, I got a call from a Nashville number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped, thinking of Daniel, of Tennessee, of the letter that had broken me open. The voice on the other end was soft, shaky. "Is this Margaret Walker?" I said yes, bracing myself. "I'm so sorry to call like this. I'm Daniel's nurse. I cared for him before he passed. He asked me to reach out if we ever found your number." I sat down, the porch swing creaking under me. "He spoke about you every day," she said. "But there's something else. He left something for you, something private." 2 days later, a package arrived, small, wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather journal, its spine cracked, pages yellowed. On the first page, in Daniel's bold, familiar script, "To the woman who carried me in her heart, even when I was too lost to return." I didn't open it right away. I waited until nightfall, when the house was quiet, the tea hot, the lights low. Emily sat across from me on the floor, cross-legged, her eyes wide with anticipation. We read it together, every word, his regrets, his memories, the moment he chose to leave, the moments he tried to come back. Letters he never sent, stories he never told. He wrote of standing outside Emily's high school graduation, hidden in the shadows, watching us because he didn't know if he deserved to be seen. He'd never stopped seeing us. At the end, he wrote, "If this journal finds you, it means I got something right. Tell Emily I never stopped loving her. Tell her I forgave her. Tell her I understand." Emily pressed her forehead to the pages and wept, not the sobs of a child, not the tears of a woman broken, but the release of someone freed. I held her hand, my own eyes burning. We buried the journal under the magnolia tree out back, beside a bench we'd painted soft blue. We didn't mark the spot, we didn't need to. The roses nearby bloomed wild, their petals falling like quiet blessings. Time passed. More women came, each with a story heavier than their bags. Sandra, with her sharp wit and endless crossword puzzles, taught me how to laugh again. Denise, quiet but fierce, started a book club in the sunroom, her voice growing stronger with every page. Every time I heard them say, "I didn't think anyone would take me in," my chest expanded, like my heart was making room for them all. Emily became their advocate, fighting for funding, for space, for their dignity. I became their storyteller, listening to their lives, weaving their pain into something that could heal. One night, on the porch swing, Emily tucked her feet under a blanket, her hand resting on mine. "Do you think he knows what we've built?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the house, glowing from within, laughter drifting from an open window, soft jazz playing in the parlor. "I think he does," I said, and I meant it. Redemption isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or thunder. Sometimes, it's a woman walking through the front door, hands shaking, eyes tired, finding a bed with fresh sheets and a note that says, "You are home." Emily and I saved each other, not by forgetting the pain, but by rising from it. The marsh hummed, the stars blinked, and Rose Harbor stood, not just a house, but a promise that scars could become foundations, that silence could become song. 3 months after Rose Harbor opened its doors, word spread beyond Charleston's marshy edges. Local news called it a southern sanctuary for the forgotten, and donations poured in, furniture, books, fresh linens. A man dropped off 5 new mattresses, tears in his eyes, whispering, "My mama died alone. I wish she'd had this." But no one knew what made Rose Harbor sacred. It wasn't the porch swing creaking in the low-country breeze, or the garden beds bursting with roses, or the curtains Emily stitched herself. It was the women told they were too loud, too needy, too old. Women left behind by children, husbands, or time itself, their stories like suitcases ready to burst. One was Ruth, 82, a former jazz singer with 2 strokes and no family except a nephew who hadn't called in years. She arrived at our gate in a wheelchair, clutching a single bag and a bottle of cheap perfume. "I heard you take women like me," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "I don't have much, but I can hum a tune." We took her in, and that night, Ruth became our heartbeat. At breakfast, she sang snippets of Ella Fitzgerald, her voice trembling but alive. She told wild stories of smoky nightclubs and love affairs with saxophone players, the other women gathering around her like moths to a flame. She reminded me of something I'd forgotten: joy isn't just survival, it's singing anyway. Emily adored her. Every Thursday night, she sat with Ruth, brushing her silver hair, listening to the same stories, never interrupting. I watched from the hallway, and sometimes, just sometimes, I saw the daughter I'd always hoped she'd become: gentle, present, unafraid of imperfection. But not every moment was easy. One night, Ruth collapsed in the hallway, her breathing shallow, eyes rolling back. Emily froze, her hands hovering uselessly. I didn't. I knelt beside Ruth, called 911, held her hand until the ambulance came. As they wheeled her out, she looked at me with glassy eyes and whispered, "Don't let me go," in silence. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Emily. We sat in the kitchen, like when she was a child with nightmares, gripping mugs we didn't drink from. The air smelled of coffee and the marsh's briny tang, the windows open to a chorus of frogs. "She's dying," Emily said, her voice hollow. "She's living," I corrected. "Right now, until her last breath, we treat her like she matters." Emily stared at me, eyes wide and wounded. "I was so scared," she said. "She looked like you." And there it was, the fear she'd carried for decades, the fear that I'd vanish, leaving her with nothing but guilt. That fear had made her cruel on her porch, but now it was making her brave. Ruth made it through the night, and the next. She came home 5 days later, an oxygen tank at her side, a playlist of jazz standards she insisted we play every afternoon. She was weaker, quieter, but still Ruth. On her final morning, she asked for one thing: let me go out singing. We dressed her in a blue velvet robe, sat her on the porch swing with a blanket around her legs. The sun was rising, painting the marsh in pinks and golds, when she sang the first lines of Misty, her voice soft, trembling, but hers. By the last note, she was gone. Emily held her hand the entire time, tears streaming down her face. We buried Ruth's ashes in the garden, beneath a rose bush we'd planted in her honor. The women placed flowers on the soil, Emily read a poem she'd written, and I wept openly, not just for Ruth, but for all of us who'd been told we were too much or not enough. That night, Emily crawled into my bed, like she did at 5, no words, just tears and silence, the deep, aching love that has nowhere else to go. I held her until she fell asleep, her breathing steady against my shoulder. The next morning, I found her in the sunroom, coffee in hand, staring out at the marsh. "I want to write about this place," she said. "The stories, the women, everything." I smiled. "Then start with your own." She turned to me, hesitant. "You think anyone would want to hear it?" "Emily Walker," I said, kissing her forehead, "your story is the one that built this house." And I meant it. It wasn't vengeance that made me whole, not the house, not Daniel's letters, but her choosing to change, to become a woman who didn't just apologize but acted. Through that, she gave me something no one else had, not just a second chance, but the life I should have had all along. The marsh hummed outside, its waters reflecting a sky bruised with dawn. Rose Harbor stood, not just a home, but a testament to what grows when you plant pain and water it with grace. A week after Ruth's funeral, I was sorting donation boxes in the sunroom, crocheted blankets, used robes, a note from a Savannah church, every stitch made with love. It had been 4 months since I bought the house, 4 months since Emily's rejection, 4 months since my world turned upside down and somehow landed right. Peace doesn't come with fanfare, it slips in quietly, like the scent of lavender on those blankets. Velma barged in, waving a newspaper. "Guess whose front page news, sugar," she said, slapping the Charleston Gazette on the table. There we were, me, Emily, the women of Rose Harbor, arms around each other on the porch, grinning like fools. From rejection to redemption, the home-changing lives in Charleston. I stared at the photo, not because I liked seeing myself, I didn't, but because I barely recognized the woman there. Not her hair or dress, but her expression. She looked happy. And that, more than anything, felt like a miracle. The afternoon sun was high, casting long shadows across the front lawn of Rose Harbor, when a knock came at the door. It wasn't a delivery or a social worker, but a boy, maybe 16, thin and nervous, clutching an envelope like it might burn him. The marsh hummed beyond the porch, its brackish scent mingling with the roses climbing the trellis. "You Margaret?" he asked, his voice cracking. I nodded. He thrust the envelope at me and bolted down the steps before I could ask his name. Inside was a letter, handwritten in careful pen, not typed, with a header from no office or firm, just a name, Elijah, bookstore clerk. "Mrs. Walker, you don't know me, but I knew your husband. Daniel worked with my mother at the bookstore in Tennessee. He talked about you a lot, said you were the strongest woman he ever met. He gave me this letter months before he passed, told me to deliver it when the time felt right. I didn't understand until I saw the news about Rose Harbor. Now I know. I hope this gives you peace." My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper inside. Daniel's handwriting was Messier, weaker, but unmistakably his, each letter carrying the weight of years. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means someone braver than me brought it to you. I wish I could have sat beside you, held your hand, said these words out loud. But life rarely gives us the endings we want, only the ones we make. I know what I did, what I left behind. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you loved me anyway. I see that now, in this house, in what you're building. You turned rejection into refuge, pain into purpose. You turned our unfinished story into something beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but maybe, in some strange way, you brought us all home. Always yours, D." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not the tears that break you, but the ones that release you, soft and steady as the marsh tide. The porch swing creaked behind me, the low-country air warm with the scent of salt and gardenias. I didn't tell Emily right away. I needed to hold this moment alone, to let Daniel's words settle into the cracks of my heart. That night, I called her outside. The moon hung high, silver light glinting off the water. I handed her the letter, and she read it in silence, one hand covering her mouth. When she finished, she leaned her head against my shoulder, like she did as a little girl, and whispered, "I wish I'd known him better." "You still can," I said. "Through this. Through us." We sat until the stars faded into morning, the house glowing softly behind us, laughter drifting from an open window where Sandra and Denise played cards late into the night. That's when I knew we'd made it through, not by erasing what hurt, but by carrying it with grace, with grit, with the belief that it's never too late to build something good from what's been broken. Rose Harbor grew. Women arrived weekly, their bags heavy, their eyes wary but hopeful. There was Gloria, 70, a retired nurse who'd lost her home to medical debt, her humor sharp as ever despite the years. And Maria, 62, whose daughter hadn't spoken to her since a fight a decade ago, her hands always busy knitting blankets for the other women. Each one said, "I didn't think anyone would want me," and each time, I felt my chest expand, making room for their stories, their scars. Emily threw herself into the work. She met with donors, organized volunteers, even learned to fix a leaky faucet when Velma wasn't around to tease her. She wasn't perfect, her old sharpness crept in when she was tired, her need for control flaring, but she laughed more now, hugged me tighter, introduced me to new residents with pride. This is my mother, Margaret. She's the reason this exists. I smiled, because I was, but so was she. We weren't just a mother and daughter anymore, we were partners in something bigger. One evening, we hosted a dinner on the lawn, nothing fancy, just folding tables, string lights, and Loretta's cornbread. The women shared stories, their voices rising over the hum of crickets. Gloria told of nursing soldiers in Vietnam, Maria of teaching herself to read as a child in Puerto Rico. I listened, my heart full, until Emily stood, her glass of sweet tea raised. This place, she said, her voice steady, is for every woman who thought her story was over. My mother taught me that. She taught me to keep going, even when I didn't deserve her grace. The crowd clapped, and I dabbed my eyes with a napkin, the scent of barbecue lingering. Later, as we cleaned up, Emily pulled me aside. I found something, she said, her voice low. She handed me an envelope, unopened, postmarked from Tennessee. Inside was a black and white photo, Daniel, me, Emily at 3, her on his shoulders, all of us laughing. On the back, in blocky handwriting, she turned out just fine. No signature, no explanation, just a whisper from the universe. I smiled, not because it tied everything neatly, but because it didn't have to. Life doesn't wrap up in bows, it twists, unravels, bends in ways we can't predict. But if we're brave, it gives us chances to heal what we thought was lost. That night, we lit candles in the windows, not for the dead, but for the living, for every woman still searching, still hoping. The porch filled with voices, laughter, hands holding hands under warm throws. Someone played guitar, the scent of cornbread and cinnamon drifting through the air. This was the ending I hadn't known I wanted, but the one I'd earned, not through perfection, but through love that refused to give up. The last box was unpacked in the library, a room we never thought we'd fill. It overflowed now with donated books, romance novels, self-help, old cookbooks, a first edition To Kill a Mockingbird with Gloria scribbled inside. Mismatched reading chairs crowded the space, a grandfather clock ticked slightly offbeat, and sunlight poured through the windows like grace itself. I ran my fingers along the spines, each one a story that had outlived its owner. Emily came in behind me, a steaming mug of chamomile tea in one hand, a folder under her arm. Her face was flushed, glowing with something deeper than makeup, meaning. She handed me the folder, final approval documents from the state. Rose Harbor Incorporated, certified nonprofit transitional living. It's official now, she said, biting her lip to hold back tears. We're real. I took the papers, my hand steady. You were always real, I whispered. You just had to remember. We spent the afternoon hanging photos in the hallway, portraits of the women who'd stayed with us, their names etched below each frame. Not just to honor them, but to see them as people, as proof that second chances could take root. Delma joined us, a tray of lemon bars in hand, her sass undimmed. Y'all gonna cry every time you hang a picture? She teased, popping a bar in her mouth. Probably, I said, grinning. Good, she nodded. Means you haven't turned to stone statues yet. Later, in my bedroom, I stood before the mirror, not fixing my hair, not adjusting my clothes, just looking. For the first time in decades, I didn't see a woman left behind, rejected, or forgotten. I saw someone whole. That's when I remembered a list I'd written long ago, tucked in the back of my old journal, titled When I Have a Home Again. I dug through drawers until I found it, the paper brittle, ink faded, but the words clear, a porch swing that creaks. A kitchen full of noise. Laughter in the halls. Music at night. Peace in my bones. A daughter who sees me. I'd checked every box. I folded the list, pressed it between two books on the shelf, and walked into the hallway. Emily stood by the front door, hands in her sweater pockets, watching the evening settle through the glass. When she turned, tears glistened in her eyes, soft and grateful. She reached for my hand, held it like something sacred. I found something today, she said quietly. She led me to the office and handed me an envelope, new, unopened, postmarked from Tennessee, no return address. Inside was a black and white photo, Daniel, me, Emily at 3, her on his shoulders, all of us laughing. On the back, in blocky handwriting, she turned out just fine. No signature, no explanation, just one final whisper from the universe. I smiled, not because it made sense, but because it didn't have to. Life doesn't tie up neatly, it twists, unravels, bends in ways we never see coming. But if we're lucky, if we're brave, it gives us chances to heal what we thought was lost forever. That night, we lit candles in the windows, not for the dead, but for the living, for every woman still on the road, still searching. The porch was alive with voices, laughter, hands holding hands under warm throws. Someone played guitar softly, the scent of cornbread and cinnamon drifting through the air. I thought, this is the ending I never knew I wanted, but it's the one I earned. The next morning, I found Emily in the sunroom, sketching plans for a garden expansion. She looked up, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Mama, you built this," she said, her voice steady. I shook my head. "We built this." And that's how you reclaim a story, not by erasing the pain, but by filling the silence it left with voices that say, "You still matter. You are not alone. You are home." The marsh outside hummed, its waters reflecting a sky bruised with dawn. Rose Harbor stood, not just a house, but a promise that scars could become foundations, that rejection could become refuge. A week later, a new woman arrived, Clara, 68, a former librarian with arthritis and a laugh that filled the room. She carried a single suitcase and a box of poetry books, her eyes wary but kind. "I didn't think anyone would have space for me," she said as I showed her to her room. I smiled, handing her a key and a note, "Welcome home." She cried, and so did I, because every door we opened was a door I'd once stood behind, waiting for someone to let me in. Emily joined us for dinner that night, the table crowded with women, plates piled with collards and fried chicken. Clara read a poem, her voice trembling but strong, and Ruth's absence lingered in the quiet moments, her jazz still echoing in our hearts. Emily squeezed my hand under the table, and I knew we weren't just surviving, we were thriving, building something that would outlast us both. The stars blinked above the marsh, the porch swing creaked, and I felt it, peace, not borrowed or fleeting, but mine. Daniel's letters, Emily's redemption, the women's stories, they weren't just pieces of a life, they were the foundation of a home that no fire, no rejection, could ever take away. Rose Harbor was ours, and it was enough. The fall air was crisp the morning I found the letter tucked beneath my porch pillow, nearly missed in my early routine of coffee and the creak of Rose Harbor swing. I'd come out before sunrise, wrapped in my old flannel robe, ready to listen to the marsh's quiet hum, frogs fading, birds waking, the occasional whistle of a car down the hill. The house slept, Emily and the women still dreaming, the world suspended in that golden Charleston dawn where grace feels tangible. But when I leaned back, something crinkled, a plain envelope, no stamp, just one word inked on the front, "Margaret." I stared at it, my breath catching. The low-country air carried the scent of salt and roses, and the swing's creak seemed louder, like it knew what was coming. I opened it with steady hands. Inside was a single sheet, typed, formal, from the law office of Franklin and Maynard. My heart sank, bracing for trouble, unresolved business from Daniel, a dispute over the nonprofit, some legal knot I hadn't seen. But it wasn't trouble. It was a gift. The letter explained that Daniel's small estate, a pension, royalties from a book project, a modest life insurance policy, named me the primary beneficiary. More than that, he'd designated 10% to Rose Harbor, under a clause for the continuation of the love that was never lost, only misplaced. I pressed my hand to my mouth, weeping right there on the swing, the letter clutched to my chest. He hadn't forgotten. In his quiet way, Daniel had come home. I told Emily later that day. She didn't speak, just wrapped her arms around me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. "He never stopped trying to fix it, did he?" she whispered, her voice thick. "No," I said. "And neither did you." With the inheritance, we expanded Rose Harbor, 2 more bedrooms, a communal kitchen, a writing room overlooking the marsh, Emily's idea. We called it Daniel's room, not out of guilt, but hope. Word spread fast. Within weeks, we had interviews lined up, more funding, even a call from a New York Times reporter. Emily handled it with grace, her clipboard in hand, glasses slipping down her nose, no longer a woman trapped in pride but one leading with purpose. One night, we hosted a candlelight dinner on the lawn, folding tables, string lights, Loretta's cornbread steaming in the cool air. The women, staff, friends from town, even Velma in lipstick, crowded around, passing mashed potatoes and stories. Someone asked, "What do you call this place, really? A shelter? A home?" I looked at Emily, and she answered, her voice clear, "This is home." The table fell quiet, because it was true. Rose Harbor wasn't just a house, it was 100 second chances, mine, Emily's, Ruth's, Daniel's, and every woman who walked through our door. Clara, the librarian, read a poem after dinner, her arthritic hand steady, her voice carrying over the crickets. Gloria laughed so hard she spilled her tea, and Maria knitted a scarf at the table, her needles clicking like a metronome. I watched them, my heart full, knowing this was what redemption looked like, not a thunderclap, but a table full of voices, a porch full of light. After the dishes were cleared, Emily pulled me aside. "Mama, you made this possible," she said, her eyes shining under the string lights. "We made it," I corrected, squeezing her hand. "Together." She nodded, and we stood there, the marsh reflecting the moon, the house glowing behind us. Laughter drifted from the parlor, where Sandra was teaching Denise to dance to an old jazz record. The air smelled of cinnamon and possibility, and I felt it, peace, not borrowed, but built. Daniel's letters, Emily's transformation, the women's stories, they weren't just fragments, they were the mortar of a home no rejection could destroy. The next morning, a new woman arrived, Eleanor, 71, a retired seamstress with a soft southern drawl and a suitcase full of fabric scraps. "I didn't think anyone would want an old woman like me," she said, her hands trembling as I handed her a key. I smiled, giving her the note we left on every pillow, "Welcome home." She cried, and I did too, because every door we opened was one I'd once stood behind, waiting. That evening, as the stars blinked above the marsh, I sat on the swing, Emily beside me, her head on my shoulder. "Do you think this is what he wanted for us?" she asked, her voice soft. I thought of Daniel's last letter, his words about refuge and purpose. "I think he wanted us to find our way," I said. And we did. Rose Harbor still stands, its porch creaking, its halls alive with laughter, stories, and the clink of teacups. Women arrive, their bags heavy, their eyes searching, and every time, I greet them with the words that saved me, "Welcome home." Because I've learned this, redemption doesn't knock. Sometimes, you build the house yourself and leave the door open. Emily and I did, and in doing so, we found not just each other, but a life where every scar became a story, every wound a window, every silence a song.